Hello, everybody. Lovely to have you back. We will now start our final closing panel. I hope you had a great exchange during your working groups. I heard some good news back. And we will start now with hearing some key points of and from the working group wrapped up by Céline. After that, I will introduce you to our wonderful German panel, which is basically a German panel trying to show what Germany can, will, and should contribute to making the European Green Deal and our pathway to a carbon neutral future a success. But already now, just a little remark, our one speaker, Katharine Wagner of HSBC, unfortunately fell ill with the coronavirus. We sent her our best wishes for a speedy and complete recovery. But we were very successful in actually getting somebody exciting new on the panel to present a business view, and that is Christian Kroll of Ecosia. I will introduce him later. Now, and again, you're already familiar with that. If you have questions, please ask them in the Zoom function questions. And Aaron will later in the debate summarize these and bring them to the panel. If you have comments, general comments, you can also use the chat function of Zoom. These functions in Woover will not be used. If you want to Twitter about the event, use the hashtag Think2030. But now, without further ado, Céline, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Camilla. And I will now share the outcomes of the different groups. I'm trying to have this in. Okay, wonderful. So just a quick reminder first. We had the first Think2030 conference in 2018, where we set up this framework which wanted to put well-being at the center, and then see also how peace and security, prosperity, and obviously nature could be furthered by environmental policies. And at that point, we had recommendations for coherence post-2020 European agenda aligned with the SDGs, and as I said, putting well-being at the center. And the single biggest challenge that was identified in 2018, and I think probably remains, is that of sustainable consumption. Now, what are the emerging recommendations from the 2020 Think2030 Idea Labs, which have brought together experts from all over Europe? So if you look at Prosperity 2030, we have points of consensus, but also points of worry, either because we disagree or we all worry together about certain things. So clearly, we have a strong consensus on the policy recommendations that are coming from the paper on sustainable recovery, and you can see those on the right side. But there's a limited confidence from attendees that the EU and national recovery funds will be substantially focused on investments that are good for the climate. Actually, over 70% are unsure or non-confident. There's also a consensus that exists that the consequence on digitalization of digitalization on climate, environment, democracy, and citizen and human rights are not yet understood and are not yet sufficiently considered in EU policy making across all fields of policy. This is why one of the recommendations coming from the conference are about harnessing digital innovation for a green recovery by embedding the sustainable development concept as well as the fight against climate change in Europe's upcoming digital targets. We also have clear recommendations regarding the race to zero and the Fit for 55 package, but also how to build a low carbon circular industry in Europe by seizing specific sector opportunities, which you can see laid out there. In terms of well-being, I think key recommendations are about putting sustainable well-being and equity at the center of the Green Deal, addressing consumption, but in an equitable way, because this is one of the flashpoints. we need to remember that material deprivation is a reality in Europe, despite growing consumption levels, and that obviously in the context of the recession, this might even get worse. And then, therefore, there is a consensus on the fact that we need to go beyond what is understood right now as the just transition, to really look at what will be needed to reskill workers, transform industries. And one of the issues that have been brought up is that of environmental literacy. And last but not least, we also are very well aware that we need to eat well within planetary boundaries. And you can see here a number of recommendations, including some which might be difficult to sell politically, such as a safe operating space for livestock. Nature 2030, you can see here a number of recommendations about integration within the EU climate policy, making sure we have biodiversity spending targets within the stimulus packages, using fully the structural funds such as the CAP strategic plans, but also making sure we leverage private investment through public funding. And for that, we need to create the right incentives for stakeholders to disinvest in land degradation and to invest in land protection and restoration. And for that, we really need to think about, having the right funding portfolios with projects on the ground, bankable projects, so to speak, that can be attractive to the private sector. Then, when we look at the issue of governance, some of the emerging recommendation is really that we need to have targets and indicators and a coherent, comprehensive set aligned with all the dimensions of the Green Deal. And this was also something highlighted by Hans Brünings during his speech. And for that, we need to make sure that SDGs, even though we have this framing of the Green Deal, are still put at the center of the framework of targets and indicators, so we can truly marry the economic, the social, and the environmental. In terms of local implementation of the Green Deal, we need to make sure that we prioritize Green Deal investments in cities that have the worst environmental and social outcomes, but also that it becomes part of the everyday planning of cities rather than something on the side. And that means we need buy-in from local authorities, but also local stakeholders, including trade unions, in devising what will be transformation, restructure, and transition plans. We also need to be aware that we will be facing years where the economic and pandemic-related challenges will be dominant in terms of the narrative. And we need to make sure that we're not seeing environment as a distraction to those, or as a trade-off, but rather as something that is synergetic. One specific issue that's been put out in the youth panel is that, yes, youth can be and should be entrusted to represent the right of future generations, but actually that might be putting too much responsibility on the shoulders of the youth. This is a shared responsibility within society, not just on the youth, and other age groups within Europe should not feel freed of that burden just because they won't be around to see the outcomes of their policies. And then last but not least, and sorry, here I wasn't able to capture yet all the points of consensus and disagreements, but clearly one flashpoint is that unilateral and aggressive implementation of a carbon border adjustment mechanism risks deteriorating partnership for climate action, whether it's with the US and China. And that's why it's really important to fully address the geopolitics of the Green Deal, think of the repercussions, whether it's of CBAM or obviously on neighboring oil and gas exporting countries, and also use our diplomacy to sell the Green Deal, but sell it in a way where there is win-win for all the different countries. And we also need to make sure we're harnessing the circular economy for green low carbon recovery. That means removing trade barriers to circular products and services, as well as removing incentives, and unfortunately there are many, that are encouraging wasteful production, wasteful consumption of materials, so that the shift to a circular economy can be truly global. Because being an island of circularity in an ocean of linearity would not be solving many of our environmental problems. So what comes next? So after the conference, we will launch a Europe-wide survey about the Green Deal together with partners, and questionnaires will go out at the end of November. Papers will be finalized based on all your inputs. So thank you so much for having done those. This is really amazing, the degree of participation we had, and that will happen as soon as possible, but definitely, hopefully by mid-November. We will also produce 2-page summaries for policymakers because we know they don't read long papers. We will disseminate each of the papers through breakfast events for MEPs between December and March. We will launch a synthesis report, but it will not look like a boring proceeding of the conference, but rather a dynamic report which will only put together the key recommendations of the Think2030 papers and the outcomes of the Green Deal survey. And I'm also super glad to announce that the next Think2030 conference will be organized together with IDRI, one of the members of Think Sustainable Europe, in 2022, ahead of the French presidency. So thank you very much. I hope I did justice to all the inputs. I had only 30 minutes to look at everything to prepare this, so I did my best. If your inputs were not reflected, please excuse me, but for sure they will be in the papers. And again, thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much, Céline. That was marvelous. And what you did here in a short moment of time, even considering that at IEP you had a power shortage. So all of this taken together, this was really a marvelous conclusion to what has been worked on. And obviously, if you want to add, you can also do that in the comment section if you want to highlight things which have not yet been said. Now, thank you, Céline. We will now come to the introductory statements of our closing panel. That's the opening of the closing panel. And they will be 3 minutes for each person, who I will introduce in a second. And I will then kickstart the debate. Before then, Aaron comes in with the clustered questions. Now, as already has been mentioned, it is now a panel to discuss also what can we expect from Germany. It is, after all, the German presidency going on, and Germany is one strong player within Europe. So what to expect from Germany? The first speaker on our panel will be Professor Dirk Messner. Professor Messner is the president of the German Environment Agency, and I hope I can see Mr. Messner's beautiful face in a second. Agency with a staff of around 1,600 in 13 locations all over Germany. He is a renowned scientist and also the co-director of the Center for Global Cooperation Research at the University of Duisburg-Essen. And in one of his more recent books, which he co-authored, he chose the title Germany and the World in 2030 on current changes and action needed. That could actually have been the title for our panel today. So thank you for that. Professor Messner, we just heard about the green recovery, the need to build forward better, and the fear to get locked into old structures with all these recovery monies and the MFF. We heard yesterday also of the difficulties already showing in the cap issues. Now, in reaction to the report back from Céline and with the focus on the financial issues, taking into account the large recovery packages as well as the funding of the MFF, how do these plans add up in your view with respect to a socio-ecological transformation and with a view to become carbon neutral by 2050? And thinking also where we are at in processes right now, what about the national level? How can sustainability be further strengthened, taking into account also the national recovery and resilience plans? Professor Messner, the floor is yours.
Oh, Camilla, this is a huge spectrum of questions. You gave me 3 minutes, right?
Right, I'm going to be harsh on the time.
Okay, good. Good. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to be with you here at this important conference. Camilla, you asked us to be concrete, no? And I wanted to describe the moment in which we are. And I will describe this moment as a tipping point situation here in the German context, but also beyond. And tipping point implies that there is no automatism towards sustainability, but some of the elements have been moving into the right direction. And some are still very fragile. And I will focus on 3 major issues. And in the discussion, then we can broaden the horizon, obviously. So the 3 main issues I wanted to focus on. The first point is that when the pandemic started several months ago, my fear was that something would happen, which happened in 2008 and 2009 after the financial crisis. After the financial crisis, climate protection, sustainability infrastructures, green issues disappeared from the agenda. So what we did at UBA is we analyzed 130 reports focusing on stimulus packages around the globe, looking at which are the major investment foci they are elaborating on. And the interesting thing, an important thing, is that 2020 is different from 2008 and 2009 because now we find around the globe only a few reports not focusing on climate issues, sustainability investments, and strategies towards a green economy. So the perspective has been changing. What we call in German the Leitbild, no? The framework of orientation has been changing. And this is not a minor thing because frameworks does not change from time to time rapidly. There is a larger dynamic behind that kind of process. This is point number 1. No? Point number 2, Céline, you talked about the geopolitics of sustainability. I like this description which you choose. And I would talk about a new geoeconomy which might emerge, be in front of our eyes now in 2020. No? We have Europe with its European Green Deal. I will come back to it in a second. We have then, Camilla, we talked about it before the panel started, the elections in the US. We might have a double Green Deal in a transatlantic perspective again. No? We heard from China for the first time that in 2060, they would like to go carbon neutral. We all know that this is not early enough, but this is the first statement into this direction. We do have similar signals from Japan and from South Korea. So if you take all of that together, there might emerge a new geoeconomic constellation driving towards sustainability and driving towards climate protection. This needs, obviously, and this is also something which Céline already stated and which we had been discussing during the conference, this new geoeconomic constellation needs to translate into a phase of real structural reforms and transformative investments in the field of energy, in the field of housing, in the field of buildings, in the field of aligning R&D investments towards sustainability. This is the decade of decisions and of real structural reforms, and this is the challenge in front of us. Therefore, monitoring the investments which are now emerging on the public side, in the German context, in the European context, is something which is very important for our kind of institutions here around the table also. So this is my second point, a new geoeconomic constellation, but there is still the moment of truth. No? So now the structural reforms are needed. Now transformative investments are needed. I'm coming to my third point. My third point is a fragile element. And the fragile element, which I see, is that for getting sustainability right and climate protection right, at the end of the day, we need to take all actors on board, all nations on board. So international cooperation is a precondition for sustainability transformations. No? And what I see, and here the situation was better in 2008 and 2009. In 2008 and 2009, we had large-scale investments and public interests in global South issues and cooperation with global South nations. This is not the case. This time. So we need to have we need much more emphasis in this dimension, also from a European perspective. So Europe needs to link its own European Green Deal with high-level investments in the global South. And the last issue I wanted to finish with, very brief, we have done this actually within the European context. I brought together with Hans Breunings at the beginning of April all European environment agencies across Europe to discuss how can we react regarding the impact of the corona crisis. And we saw a divided Europe actually, because we saw the strong economies, so Sweden and Norway and the Netherlands and others, arguing that this is the moment to combine stimulus packages with the green economy. And we listened to the weaker economies arguing that in our societies, this discourse is disappearing, it's impossible. The 750 billion package was a precondition for the debate about the climate goal being more ambitious, which we are having now. If we would not have had this 750 billion package, we would have failed having Europe as a pioneer driving any kind of sustainability transformations. And this is what we need to transport now, to transfer to the international level, because internationally, things are not moving forward at the speed needed. Thank you, Camilla.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a brilliant start, reminding us about the national level and the international impact, and how the scene has changed when you compare it to the last financial crisis. And it linked nicely to also yesterday's debate, where we said the European Green Deal making climate change for the first time the leading topic of policymaking in Europe. That's a fundamental shift in policymaking, and you were referring to that this happens in other countries as well. However, we also saw on the ground, not also only internationally, but nationally, action is still needed and not everything is yet lining up. Now, we can dive into that later, but first there comes this wonderful statement, now thank you, Professor Messner, by Ambassador Hinrich Thölken. In his distinct career, Ambassador Thölken showed strong commitment already in the past to strengthening climate diplomacy, already 10 years back and longer, transboundary water cooperation, biodiversity, and sustainable development. He represented Germany at the UN organizations in Rome, including the FAO, and he is now Germany's first digital ambassador, and furthermore director of climate and energy policy and digital transformation at the German Foreign Service. Now, Ambassador Thölken, you already heard what just has been said. There was a strong international angle in both presentations. There was the link to the SDGs. There was the carbon border mechanisms, geopolitics of the European Green Deal, the new geopolitical structure and economy we might be moving into, the need to sell win-win situations, and similar things. Now, if you look at the European situation right now, there is the European climate law in the European Green Deal to be passed very soon, with a goal of achieving the climate neutrality by 2050 and a higher level of ambition in 2030. What is the significance of what you have just heard, and specifically of the European Green Deal? Do these decisions and dynamics have an impact for Europe's perception in the world? Can we be, as has been said, can we be a leader and somebody who inspires, or are we actually not delivering enough to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla. First, a commercial break here, the cup, to show that. Yeah. Speaking after Dirk Messner is always a tough challenge, because basically he covered so many geo-economic and also without naming then geopolitical aspects. So I will try and find a few details that I can present to you from my perspective. First of all, I'd like to point out again that the European climate law is a centerpiece of climate diplomacy, also on a level beyond Europe. Why is that so? We tend to see ourselves in Germany and in Europe as front runners when it comes to climate diplomacy, climate ambition. We like what we do, and we believe that we are the good ones, always aiming at the best for the planet. And seen from outside Europe, I think we are judged a bit more, let's say, differently sometimes, and we are measured by the kind of action and the size of the action that we are taking. And therefore, hopefully passing successfully the climate law and spelling out in detail a more ambitious reduction target for 2030 and putting out a legal obligation to reach the big target 2050 would be a huge support, a huge element in our international climate diplomacy. It would make Europe immediately much more credible and much more, let's say, to an example in international climate ambition. So this is, let's say, imperative that we get to that point, and hopefully, this is what we aim at, is that we get it through during our EU-German presidency. Of course, it would be a wonderful centerpiece of the, let's say, the total sum that we are doing at the end of this year. Why is it important? Because we tend to have a kind of psychological lock-in when it comes to climate ambitions. We put together the most optimistic scenarios. We look to the United States. We want to have this Biden administration coming into place 20th of January. We want to see that their climate agenda is being implemented. We like what we hear from China, from Japan, from Korea. And psychologically, we always put together the most optimistic pieces and say, well, we're almost getting there. We're halfway there. It's wonderful because US, China, and Europe together is more than 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions. However, there's this other part of the, let's say, psychology. It's called reality. And there will be a reality check both to, let's say, our ambitions, but also to the Biden ambitions. All the plans that they have in the drawers will probably not be able to be materialized in this way. And we still have to see whether the announcements made by China will actually be followed through, will be part of the next 5-year plan, and will happen on real ground. And in order to help these, let's say, processes, both in Washington and in Beijing and also other countries, we need to have the European climate law as setting a standard, setting a good example, and giving an impetus to what we hope to see. And this is the race for the top, for the most, let's say, ambitious climate policy, and not a race for the bottom that would be, let's try to get it out of the way with the least possible effort. And therefore, I believe we have to put all the energy behind this project of getting the climate law passed by the end of the year. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ambassador Thölken. That coming from somebody representing the German government makes me very hopeful that with this power and energy and convincing case, you actually can convince Europe to come together on that. Because yesterday we looked also at the UNEP gap report and saw that the action on the ground is actually totally not adding up yet, despite all the nice words we put down in 2015 in the Paris Agreement and afterwards in different contexts, including our NDCs. Now, thank you very much. We will dive into that later, but now I have the pleasure to welcome Luisa Neubauer to the panel. Luisa Neubauer is actually known to be the German face of the Friday for Future movement. Lovely to have you. Lovely to have you. At the last EU summit in Sibiu in 2019, Luisa Neubauer actually was together with other climate activists when meeting Emmanuel Macron and 8 other heads of state and governments to discuss the climate crisis and the political response to it. She was active in a number of civil society organizations, including those on investments where divestment, I wanted to say, including those fighting for divestments where she had early successes. And she actually made headlines when she confronted Siemens and its CEO on its investment in coal. Now, you heard now the ambition, you see what's happening on the ground. Maybe we could have a look on your views on what you have heard and what you actually see. You know, the reality check Ambassador Thölken was just talking about. And maybe you could also look at one of the reports which just came out by the Fridays for Future movement in Germany, where they looked how Germany could become CO2 neutral by 2035. What might be 1 or 2 key takeaways from this for Germany and for the road to climate neutrality for Europe, in your view? Luisa Neubauer, it's a pleasure to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, for inviting me, for introducing me so kindly. Yes, I think before I get to this recent study that we just published, I think it's really important to take into account where we are right now. And what we are seeing is a world that has warmed by 1.2 degrees, and it is on fire, or it's melting, or it's flooding. When I talk to our Fridays for Future activists right now in the Philippines, they have struggled every time charging their laptops, charging their phone, because the typhoon has been hitting so hard. And this is the 21st typhoon hitting this year alone. The average in the last decades was 10 typhoons per year. Now it's the 21st in the Philippines, and it's a scenario that we're seeing around and around and around. 1.2 for many places, for the activists I work with, is a disaster. So what we are really looking at is, what do we need to get to a pathway that allows us to stay at 1.5 and not further. This is what has also been agreed on in Paris. That is where the ambitions are heading. And we are seeing very worryingly that a debate is getting away from 1.5, where governments around the world, also the German one, are making up a 2-degree target, which has never been decided on, which it doesn't say in Paris, and obviously which isn't really adding up with the reality of the climate crisis that we are seeing. So what we are really asking governments, industries, institutions around the world is to provide plans to fight for 1.5. And for this, one really important aspect is obviously the emission budget that is there. And of course, the concept of an emission budget is a complicated one, yet without starting to actually understand that there's only so and so much emissions that we can emit, just like a financial budget that we have for our investment. That is one crucial starting point that we are pledging our governments and, for instance, the EU to work with. Without switching this logic away from the idea that we just do as much as we can and then we see where we end up towards a logic where we work with what we have and aim at something that is really, that is really reliable. We won't get where we need to be. That is not how international climate diplomacy can work. And what it says in the report that we just published now in Germany, where we actually asked a research institute, what does Germany need to do to stick to 1.5? So we did ask for climate neutrality by 2035, but just for 1.5 scenario. It obviously provides a range of things that need to change, and that is drastic. That is a huge amount of stuff that needs to be done. And one, I think, crucial message here is the most important part, the most important work is being done in the next 5 years. That is what it is about. And so when talking about 2050, by 2040, that is all nice and good to discuss that. But the crucial work happens in the next 5 years. So that's what we need. We need those plans for those 5 years. How can they make a difference and bring us to a 1.5 degree pathway? And currently, there is no government, no plan, no idea, no policy, nothing really that we can rely on, that scientists would claim us that could be a guarantee for us. So that is really what we're waiting for, and that's what we're asking governments, industry to do worldwide, and also, of course, Germany and the EU.
Thank you very much for this actually wake-up call that we are not seeing what is needed. That actually has been confirmed by many analyses worldwide, and I believe nobody on this panel would disagree with that, but also that the Fridays for Future movement clearly makes a statement towards going towards 1.5 degrees Celsius. As we all know, the Paris Agreement said we want to stay well below 2 degrees Celsius with the aim of heading towards 1.5. I don't have the exact wording, but it's well below 2 degrees with the aim of striving towards 1.5 degrees Celsius. And you said the next 5 years are decisive. The next 5 years, we will actually have to see the action on the ground. And we were already talking about infrastructure, about lock-ins, about the money being dispersed right now, which will shape the future. Now, I'm really happy to have the next person on our panel being one of the shapers who does do things differently and who does bring about change. And it has already been mentioned by Céline also, the digital innovation for a green recovery. And the person I welcome now, Christian Kroll, does do digital innovation. Now, Christian Kroll is the founder of the search engine Ecosia. And thank you for being with us on short notice and in a beautiful landscape. Ecosia uses 80% of its profits to plant trees. Since 2009, when it started, it actually planted more than 100 million trees worldwide. And that includes projects, for example, in Peru, Colombia, Brazil, Spain, Madagascar, Kenya, and Indonesia, just to name a few of them. The Berlin-based search engine Ecosia has now 70 employees and millions of users. And this company now plants a tree every second. So since we started already, hundreds of trees have been planted. I'm really happy to hear about that. Christian Kroll and Ecosia won many awards for this, including the Green ICT Award by the Federal Ministry for Economics and the Karma Consumption Award. But most recently, just this summer, they also won the German Startup Award. Congratulations to that. Now, Mr. Kroll, you are one of the new generation of entrepreneurs thinking business differently. You think differently on how to do business and why to do business. Please let us know what you would consider actually a business model contributing to the future we want to see. And with this in mind, what do you think about what you just heard? And what do you think Germany and the European Green Deal could and should deliver to make sustainable business models prosper? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy to be part of this wonderful panel. So I'm, I would say, one of the entrepreneurs who are really trying to solve the problem of climate change. And I just want to point out that what I have seen in the last 2 years really gives me a lot of hope, at least when I look at the entrepreneurial landscape. There are a lot of young people who want to start businesses that not only make money, but that actually have a valuable contribution to solving climate change. So I'm happy that that this kind of movement is starting. What I want to point out is that I think entrepreneurs are very good at finding solutions, but what we definitely need are the right incentives and the right conditions to be impactful. So, and I mean, there are things, for example, like a CO2 price, which will just be very helpful at probably creating new kinds of businesses, but also helping to change consumption. So that is super important. But what I also see, for example, Ecosia has invested more than 10 million euros in the last 2 years into renewable energy to make sure that our servers are running not only on 100% renewable energy, but actually 200% renewable energy. And there in Germany, we saw actually the conditions getting worse. So it's becoming less attractive to do investments in renewable energy, which is, I think that's a step in the wrong direction. And we need policymakers to change that and really set the right incentives. Very similar, the common agriculture policy for me, that is what has recently been announced. That is not very promising. I think we should probably think again about how we really want to make sure that we use the sector of agriculture actually as a carbon sink and not a carbon emitter. There's huge potential in the area of agriculture, and I think there we have a missed opportunity, and I hope that we can revisit that topic. What is also important that in other areas of regulation, we really look at how could this affect the climate, but also the society. What is really important for us, for example, is competition law. We are Europe's or the biggest European-based search engine, but we only have around 1% market share in Europe. There is Google with around 98% market share, and their competition with Google is really hard because they are not, I would say, behaving fairly. And competition, at least the action on the side of competition has actually been quite slow there. So yeah, I think we also need some support there. I also hope that we don't underestimate the power of natural solutions. When you look at Project Drawdown, for example, you have 12 of the top 20 solutions being natural solutions, including land use and food. And I also think we should really, I think the EU can be a role model. Our biggest impact can probably be outside of the European Union. And then most importantly, it's not about talking, but about action on the ground. We see a lot of pledges for tree planting, for example, but we don't see many people actually planting trees. So it needs to be translated to what's actually going on. And I just wanted to highlight what Luisa said. We don't need 2 degrees, we need 1.5 degrees, and we need equivalent action.
Thank you very much, Christian Kroll, for these enlightening words from somebody who actually does do things on the ground in the business community. I'm glad to hear you, similar to Ambassador Thölken, are slightly hopeful. I'm also cautiously hopeful. I think there is an opportunity, but it might slip if we don't grab it. So you were pointing, and this might be something to be taken up later, to CO2 price, to investment conditions, to the cap reform, and to competition law. And we obviously already talked about competition law. We had also yesterday a short mentioning of the state aid guidelines, and border tax adjustment came up today. So there is quite a huge bundle of issues which are on the table, which will be on the table next year, and which have to deliver. And that is actually the perfect face over to our next speaker, Ms. Francisca Brantner. She is part of the German Green Party. Hello, Ms. Brantner. Over the last decade, the German Green Party has been very successful in strengthening its voter base. Indeed, right now, if there were election, they would reach around 20% of the German votes. And so they might play a role in the next German government, with actually next year in autumn, Germany electing a new government, and next year will actually be a super election year because there are also many elections on the subnational level next year. Now, Francisca Brantner is since 2013 a member of the German Parliament. Before, she was a member of the European Parliament. Right now, not surprisingly, she's the spokeswoman for European policy of her parliamentary group, and calls herself a confident European. Now, you heard what has just been said. You also heard about the need for action on the ground, and the incentives and conditions to trigger this action and support this action. Let's do the political reality check with you being a policymaker actually working on the frameworks the others have to act in. We actually might link that also to the consumer point we had heard before, where we say, let's not individualize consumers, but give them the framework they need to actually consume in a sustainable way. It is evident societies have to change fundamentally, yet change is not coming easy. And we can see that all around the world. Now, why are we not yet on a pathway in line with the Paris Agreement? I mean, that was 2015. We had some time, and now we are saying, oh, the next 5 years are decisive. Well, have we lost 5 years? What has been happening? What can we expect from Germany in the coming year, thinking about this super electoral year? And what can we expect from Germany with respect to the European Green Deal? Francisca Brantner, the 3 minutes are yours.
Yeah, thank you. And I share the frustration over why haven't we gotten further in the last 5 years. But I still want to say at this point, thank you to all of you in think tanks, civil society, Fridays for Future, who have been pushing in the streets in advocacy over the last couple of years, because without you, we would be even less ahead than we are right now, even though I completely agree it's still way too slow. And I think, as Luisa said, the next 5 to 10 years will be the decisive one. So our goal is to create majorities for an ambitious climate policy. we need to get majorities in the vote. Like that's in the end what counts. We need to do this at state level. We need to do this at a federal level, and that's what we are focusing on. And that's really our goal. And that we don't open up wrong fights, that we don't get divided as climate activists, because there's only one who would be happy about this. These are those who don't want to change. So I think we have to, it's a strategic moment that we have to watch carefully that we're not going to be divided over the next year, because there's so many who wish to divide us. And there's so many who wish to see that we're going to fight internally over some dimensions. So I think that's the big strategic challenge we all do face, and that we have to confront together. To the points that I think Germany, with regards to the Green Deal, briefly 3 points: money, the pricing of CO2, and then the legal aspect. When it comes to spending now the recovery fund, the European Parliament has set a quite, I think, ambitious position that it needs to be 40% on climate and biodiversity. It's now going to be negotiated with the Council. The Commission had proposed 37 on climate. I hope there will be an ambitious outcome. And the European Parliament has achieved in the budget negotiations as such, and my Green colleague Rasmus Andresen has been key on this, to achieve a new methodology on how to count this. This was mentioned by several of you, that it depends on how you're going to calculate it, what it's going to count as climate protective or not. And then it comes to Germany. We have to send, as Germany, as every other member state, a national recovery plan. I have been upset so far that the German government is not launching a far and wide process, including all you actors and Fridays for Futures and others, on how we're going to implement this. Other countries like the Netherlands, Portugal are really going ahead, are very creative. We should ask for the same in Germany. We need to have an ambitious implementation of the common agricultural policy. It's a nightmare what's the outcome right now. At least we have to make it ambitious in Germany. When it comes to the ETS, Germany is the actor blocking still a minimum floor. I think that this is key to fight on. And last point, when it comes to legislation, there also we have to, in Germany, to move away from a more blocking position to one that is constructive on circular economy. We heard many points about this. But I think the ETS pricing is important when we keep in mind the difficulties mentioned on border adjustment mechanisms and trade wars. Because that's something that usually stands in front of the WTO. So we have to think about good ways, and all the Western countries are in favor of it. Germany is still blocking, plus some of the Eastern Europeans. At least Germany has to move there.
Thank you very much, Francisca Brantner. Now I invite everybody to come to the panel, if you may, even though it's virtual. And while the others are coming in, Francisca Brantner, I might have a little follow-up on the ETS thing. Obviously, that is part of the action plan to talk about the ETS next year, and there's a lot of talk about expanding the ETS. Now, having been part in introducing the ETS in the first place, back then in 2003, it started for me, we saw how difficult it is and lengthy it is to bring about ETS schemes and how much loopholes they can bring about. And is that actually the most promising approach when you think about what Luisa Neubauer just said and what also Christian Kroll underlined? We have little time and we should aim for high ambition, and we need to see action in the next 5 years.
The ETS will be reformed, and we have to be ambitious about its reform. I said it's one aspect of many. We need the legal aspects, and we can go into that. We need the financing, we can go into that. I just think we shouldn't forget this point, because I've responded to one of the points in the chat as well, because I think there will be legal challenges when it comes to the border adjustment mechanism, and we have to think about how we do this. And when we spend the EU funding, I think we have to be much more, as I said, radical in terms of the methodology, how we use it also with European partners. So far, the EU budget is per nation. So there are many infrastructure projects. I just want to mention in transport that we know that we need to do across the borders. There's no funding foreseen for that. So we need member states like Germany to say we do align with all the others, and we give parts of our national funding for the infrastructure we need, energy infrastructure, transport infrastructure that is climate neutral. So this is the big challenge where we need Germany to move faster. And also I would use part of that funding for what Dirk Messner was about, talking partnerships with other countries for the transition. And we should not forget this, that we need to continue financing these needs. And then we can go into many details on the legal aspects that are coming from the EU Commission.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask one overarching question to kind of get the spirit in the room. We heard about the tight timeline, and we heard about obstacles and opportunities, thinking also about that the opportunity to be a council presidency comes about every 14 years. I would like to ask those who are involved in the German government, what are the obstacles and opportunities right now to be used towards, using this opportunity now? And I think we heard about the climate law already, so we can set that a bit aside, at least for those who talked about it. And for the others, what are the two key obstacles and two key opportunities we should focus on to make change happen, as you asked for, in the next 5 years? And Hinrich Thölken, Ambassador Thölken, can start, and Professor Messner can follow.
Yes, you can hear me now. Thank you for the question. Every 14 years is fine, yes, and it's a wonderful opportunity. In brackets, it's also sometimes a burden, but brackets closed. But we should not have any illusions about what a presidency can do, what they cannot do. As a presidency, we are also asked to stay neutral, to be the mediator, to reconcile positions that might be differing. And if you look at the current situation that we have with the EU budget, it was mentioned by Francisca Brantner, it is blocked right now because we have to get all member states on board. And we can be in perfect agreement here in this conference, and I'm sure we are on many aspects. We need to have a consensus that covers the whole of Europe. Otherwise, we will get nowhere. And this is the real challenge that we are now facing, to get those member states on board who have second thoughts, different opinions, are hesitating because of national interests or looking at the bill that they are facing. And this is the art of negotiating, finding a good compromise, and really settling for the best possible solution. And whatever the best possible compromise will then be, it will never be the ideal solution that we in this room might want to have. It is just not feasible right now in the given political context.
Thank you.
Sorry, for me, it's realistic.
Yes, so the consensus challenge, which has been also subject to many papers, but still the three presidencies agreed, Germany and incoming Portugal and then Slovenia, to make it an overarching priority to have robust measures on the recovery, and then in line with sustainable and inclusive growth strategy to take into account the goal to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. So I think, even though it's a burden now, it's actually also an agreed wish to work towards it together with the other presidencies. And I think one has to think about this timeline. But the consensus challenge, we hear that every morning in the news with quite a bit of frustration. Professor Messner.
Now it's working, the microphone? Okay, good. So regarding the opportunities on the European level, I would mention first, Hinrich, what we discussed recently again and again, how to mobilize the digital opportunities to drive disruptions in the field of climate protection and sustainability transformations. And fortunately, the German government has been putting this issue on the agenda. I can tell you that in the crowd of environmental policymakers, also environmental ministers across Europe, this hasn't been an issue 50 months ago. Now it is an issue at least. So, and there are many opportunities and many potentials, and leveraging those is very, very important. We haven't debated this during this panel. For me, this is absolutely fundamental. Christian, you are working in this field. No? This is point number one. What is very challenging, and the issues which I wanted to emphasize in this field, is that looking at these reports which we analyzed around the globe, no? So what they are emphasizing is investments in climate-related and sustainability-related arenas, which is fine. What many of these reports does not discuss and not develop further is which kind of structural policies we need to make this happen long term. Franziska, this is what you said. The incentives, the CO2 price, aligning any kind of policy arena with sustainability and the climate goals. This is what needs to be done, Luisa. This is what needs to be done during the next 5 to 10 years. This is hard stuff. So we have now a new investment orientation, but the structural policies needed around that are still not in place. I give you one example where in Germany we are moving into the wrong direction. We started with ecological tax reforms 20 years ago. And the idea was simple, straightforward, and still completely correct. Taxing higher consumption of resources and pressure on ecosystems and lower labor, with obviously positive effects on both sides. What we did during the last 10 years in Germany, but also in other European countries, we moved backwards. We now have again higher taxation on labor and relatively to that lower taxation on consumption, on the consumption of environmental issues. So this is part of this structural reforms needed. And here a lot of things are being done. And then again, only one sentence. Europe is a pioneer currently, driving the debate about Green Deals globally, but it is not looking at Global South issues. No one is looking at Global South issues and will not get the whole thing right if we don't move into this direction. I'm talking with African colleagues every day. If we do ambitious climate protection in Europe, there will be challenging impacts for African countries because 30 to 40 countries are dependent on exporting fossil fuels. What are we doing with them? How are we supporting them? So if we don't get answers in this field, we will fail at this front.
Camilla.
Yeah, I saw that. Thank you. That links nicely to structures again, to think about systems and structures rather to think about issues. And you didn't say it explicitly, but I think it's not only about investment, but also where do we want to disinvest, where are the harmful subsidies and the like. So Franziska, you raised your hand. And then I will bring Christian Kroll because we talked about the digital opportunities, and obviously he is the perfect person to talk about it before Luisa Neubauer finishes up the opening discussion, and then we will bring on our colleagues from around the world and from around Europe with their questions and Q&As.
Yes, very briefly, you asked for what are the opportunities. I think, the fact that member states agreed we will get the final approval of the EU budget, that 40% have to be spent, 30 climate change, 10 biodiversity, is an opportunity if we do check it and that it's implemented well. If we take that serious, we need to reopen the reform of the agricultural policy, because with the current answer, you cannot spend 10% on biodiversity. It just won't work. So I think this is an opportunity, but we have to take it serious and make sure it will be implemented. Second point on the, the climate law is stuck now because it has to go to a council for setting in the 2030 target. We could have an agreement on that in an environmental minister council where you only need for this law qualified majority vote. You don't need unanimity for this. You don't need unanimity for ETS reform, but it needs courageous leaders who are ready to take that steps and have votes in the worst case, but combine it with help to these countries. And I think it was really bad that the council in July cut by half the funding for the Just Transition Fund. Because I think we have countries, like the Czech Republic, etc. They have a more difficult path to exit quickly. And I think we need to be in solidarity there. And we need to be ambitious, but in solidarity. And it was wrong that these fundings were cut. And I think on the energy partnerships, yes, Dirk, what will happen to countries? They're already in crisis modus. If their only resource of income flies away, what will happen? And I think there are new opportunities. Let's create health partnerships. Some of these countries, they can help us to produce masks. Create new partnerships or other medicine, etc. We have to be creative, but we cannot just leave them alone. And then we, of course, can create energy partnerships, with India, with other countries. But we have to be strategic about it and help them in the transition. Otherwise, I think it will backfire.
Thank you very much. With this energy, we certainly can create partnerships. Christian Kroll.
Just want to underline again the importance of digitalization by bringing one example of what we're doing. We're trying to develop features at Ecosia that also help people to make more sustainable choices. So let's say you want to buy a flight from Berlin to Munich and type that into your search engine or into Ecosia, then we would tell you how much kilograms of CO2 you could save by taking the train instead. So those kind of features, I think, could help us moving that transition faster, and we try to play a role in that. There's one important obstacle that I'm also seeing, and that is what I mentioned earlier already, the capacity to actually implement things on the ground. And by that, I mean both in Europe, but also outside of Europe. For example, Professor Thölken questioning was asked what the main obstacle would be for doing a transition to renewable energy, and he said there's probably not enough labor available to implement or to build all the renewable energy projects that would be needed. Same with tree planting. We need to plant 1 trillion trees, but they're not the projects. We don't have the projects there on the ground in Europe or outside of Europe to actually do it. On the other side, so that needs to be taken into account when we're making or developing the policies for that, so that it also needs to be implemented. On the other side, I think this is also very positive news because we could create billions, well, not billions, but probably hundreds of millions of jobs, really meaningful jobs if we do that right.
Thank you very much. Also ending on a hopeful note, and I might add the supply chains, which have been a big topic over the last year. They also have to change, have to become more sustainable. It's a big issue. And getting to the informal sector and how to do that with the informal sector strongly involved in other countries, it's a huge challenge. So that is just linking the North-South challenge, which you highlighted. Luisa Neubauer.
Okay. Yes, I was just, I would just highlight again that I think what is crucial for those 5 years is an understanding that one very fundamental dynamic has shifted in the past. And that is the idea from what side comes progress and from what kind of direction emerges positive change. And that has to do with intervening. We look at the UN Production Gap Report and we see that we've already legalized global warming by far beyond 2 degrees. And we've already legalized by contracts, by binding treaties and all those things, ecological destruction beyond everything we could possibly tolerate. And that is okay, because many of those things haven't been finalized yet. So we could just understand this as a decision that was made in a different time with less knowledge, with less, of a societal shift towards ecological issues. Yet when we talk about, for instance, about the CAP, so the agricultural reform, we're not talking just about, making this a better CAP, but actually opening it again, intervening and saying, well, actually, this doesn't fit in the time. This doesn't fit in our planetary boundaries. It doesn't fit in our emission budget. And this counts for many, many, many projects. So I think here we look at what kind of mechanisms are needed to get out of this crisis. And that obviously can be the same ones, the similar ones to those who have brought us into the crisis. So I think here the challenge for democracies is really to find out what kind of toolbox, what kind of toolkit, what kind of mechanisms are needed to peacefully and in a democratic process reopen a number of cases that have kind of been agreed on already, that will have to be opened again and negotiated again. Because one thing is clear, no matter what we do, we will have to break some things that we promised in the past. And right now we're breaking agreements and promises on ecological targets, we're breaking promises on biodiversity issues, not getting to the SDGs in the pace that we need to, that was decided on. We're not getting to our the biodiversity targets. We've missed 19 of 20 biodiversity targets in Germany alone. So we are breaking things, we are breaking promises in a sense. And the question right now for the next 5 years is which ones will that be? And for that, I think we're getting to a point, what does democratic leadership look like? What does a council here leadership must look like? And what does courage mean in these times? And this is really understanding the essential shift here is a shift towards intervening, towards intervention, where we say actively no to the ongoing destruction. Leaving things as they are, we are on a path towards 3 to 5 degrees. The destruction is accelerating everywhere. And just by letting things go the pathway that was agreed on, there's no chance whatsoever to get anywhere. But, ending on a hopeful note, it doesn't have to stay that way. We can shift things around. And right now, there's a lot we can save.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There's tons I would love to go into depth with you, but I also want to include our audience. So let's do that for the next 20 minutes. Erin, what do you read and hear in the Q&A areas and possibly the chat?
Thanks, Camilla. There's a great deal of interest in the international dimensions of Germany's role, globally, in the EU's role with trading partners. So let me just try to characterize a little bit of that discussion and then leave it to you, Camilla, for how to direct those questions. So on the one hand, Germany has massive historic responsibilities as a technology supplier for carbon emissions, chemical and plastic pollution. So how can Germany recognize that responsibility? Another issue that's come up is, given that in the EU framework, firms doing business are required to pay for at least some of the carbon emissions, how can the border tax adjustment mechanism be used and also used selectively? We're seeing a growing interest in some other nations in pursuing net zero targets. So how can the EU use a border carbon adjustment tax to make sure that the prices are fair there and use that as an incentive? And one of the key concerns then balancing that out is the development obligations and opportunities that exist for Germany and EU with trading partners and the global South, how to balance that need of sustainable development as well. So a very complicated, complex set of international issues, and the audience is very interested to hear what people have to say about striking the right balances.
Excellent. I would do it now, and you can oppose by showing me a sign of hand, because I want to then get another round of questions from the audience. I would direct the border adjustment, incentivizing net zero target, to Francisca Brantner and potentially Hinrich Thölken. I would then the development obligations and opportunities and the historic responsibility I would direct to Dirk Messner, because I know where you come from your research, and you should have a lot to say about it. Christian Kroll and Luisa Neubauer, you can come in on these questions if you want to. Otherwise, I would get you in the next round of questions. Thank you, Erin. And I would start with, who wants? With Dirk Messner, Professor Messner.
Yeah, on the international dimension, my first point would be that we have to remember that Europe as a whole, the European Union, is the largest investor in the field of ODA, so development cooperation investments. No? And if we would invest a larger part of that in the sustainability transformations we are now arguing upon, this would be very important. And we needed to top this up. I have been arguing in favor of investing in a significant share of the 750 billion package, not only in Europe, but in the rest of the world. No? I talked about 5 to 10%. This wouldn't be a large share, but it would be significant at least. No? Currently, we are not moving into this direction. And if we emphasize this urgency, this is one point. The second point, with a group of partners from developing countries, emerging economies, and OECD countries, we are preparing for a conference where we try to figure out jointly which kind of digitally driven investments would help us to leverage climate-related patterns in the next generation of technologies and investments in different parts of the world, having a priority list, to give orientation. So this is the second example where between actors from different parts of the world and regions, we could move forward together. And there is a lack in this kind of international cooperation-oriented activities currently.
Thank you very much. I would now turn to Ambassador Thölken. Excellent that you wanted to do that as well. And maybe you can also, I mean, in the European Green Deal, we have a part on Europe in the world. Maybe you can comment on that as well in combination with the other points.
Yeah, let me first make a brief remark about the responsibility issue that was raised by Andreas Kremer in the chat. Of course, we do have a responsibility, but I would just like to give a little warning. It will not help us tremendously if we now come out with scores of who is responsible to which extent on what is happening in the world. I think we should look at the possibilities, the capacities we have to act now and to really get climate change going. That's probably much more action-oriented than a, let's say, a discussion going backwards and trying to figure out how much responsibility do we have. Second point I'd like to say is COVID-19. Nobody has mentioned it so far. Great, I'm the first one. The interesting learning experience that we had in the past 9 months is disruption is possible. Up until a year ago, would have said we will never manage disruption in Germany or even Europe. It's impossible for us. It's just not in our genes, in our DNA. Now we found out, hey, we can disrupt a lot of things. And this refers to what Luisa Neubauer said. Yes, I think it's an encouragement to us. We have the possibility, the ability, and even to some extent, the acceptance in the public that disruption of what we have been doing so far, and we always believe is the right thing, is possible. We can do things differently. About the specific question to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, we're going to see a proposal by the Commission next year, I hope. So it's very difficult for me to look into the glass bowl and say this is how it's going to work. People who know much more about this are really trying to come up with good ideas and trying to put a scheme together. So there's not much that I could say at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisca Brantner.
Yes, thank you. I would like to answer that if we really want to get our industrial sectors like steel and cement to CO2 free, we have to make sure that we do not import steel and cement from outside that is full of CO2. So that has to be the goal, because otherwise it doesn't make sense for the climate either. So that's where the idea for this border adjustment mechanism comes from, which is, of course, has some implications for trade. And, you know, with President-elect Biden, who wants to go back to climate protection, I think it will be important to sort of work together on such a project, because if we do it against Americans, we have fewer chances of winning it in front of the WTO, let's put it this way. And at the same time, as you do this, and I think we have to advance with this project, and I'm looking forward to the proposals from the Commission, we also have to think smartly about alternatively already bringing in ways that can help us. And that's why I talked about the ETS floor, the price, because that's something that is accepted because it's for everybody. And it will be more difficult to fight against it in front of the WTO or to make a trade case about it. So that's, I think, to have it in mind. And then on the responsibility question, I share what Dirk said. And let me add that I think we have the main responsibility to show that climate protection, well-being, and democracy do go together. That's, I think, our real priority, to show that we can do this and that we can do it jointly with others. And that's what we have to prove. Democracy, well-being, climate protection, the three together, that's our main responsibility. And we're far from that yet. And allow me to say one point on the labor, because I think it's very true. For example, on the renovation wave, one really problem is that you don't have enough people to do it. So what we do in Baden-Württemberg, and it's an idea that comes from the Grüne Jugend, the Green Youth, is to say we want to have a partnership for training, Ausbildungsallianz fürs Klima mit dem Handwerk. So to say we do want to go into an offensive to get more young people to go and work into the sector. Because if we want to be successful, we need labor that can do it. And I think it's, you know, also to go these ways is important because they, you know, they don't grow. So you have to get people to go in that sector. So I think it's a very fair point that was made.
Thank you very much. And that relates to knowledge systems. We really have to think about knowledge systems, and coming back to the cap. If we don't have the knowledge in place, but with the people who have to implement new ways, we will not get their confidence that they are able to change, and then we will face resistance. So I think that's a very fair point. I will take Luisa Neubauer after Erin brought back some questions, because you agreed on certain things, and I'd be also interested in your look on this slight controversy over responsibilities, past responsibilities and responsibilities towards the future. But first, Erin, please come in with the second set of questions from the Q&A.
Great. Well, it's been a little bit quiet. You're all encouraged to put in questions. Many of them were about international issues, which I've bundled together. We had a digitalization workshop today, and two of our speakers have done quite a bit of work on digitalization, Dirk Messner and Ambassador Thölken. One of the issues that came up there in our discussion was that in many ways, it's the underlying incentives, and this was an issue also raised by the CEO of Ecosia. The underlying incentives are missing, and that whatever entrepreneurship and ideas come up out of digitalization developments respond to those incentives, and that a lot of digitalization policy is actually dealing with the deeper layer of challenges and issues that digitalization is trying to address. So I'd be interested in your responses on that in terms of how to approach digitalization and the underlying structures there.
Can you specify that a little bit, because I didn't quite get what you mean in the underlying structures there?
Oh, well, just the idea, a lot of digital innovations are better ways of doing things, sometimes doing new things, but they're often reducing costs or increasing capabilities. And those opportunities exist because of some of the incentives that exist to do those things. So the prices, for example. So if prices aren't telling the ecological truth, then the incentive is in place to digitalize for the wrong things, shall we say.
Okay, so the right way forward for digitalization for sustainability, let's call it like this. I first bring in Luisa Neubauer on the questions I already mentioned. If she wants to, you can decline with a smile. And then obviously on the digitalization, I would bring in Ambassador Thölken as he is Ambassador for Digitalization, and Christian Kroll as the expert on that. And please, Luisa.
Could you quickly specify your question?
It was really coming in on the question of responsibility. We had here in the chat the issue that historical responsibility should be part of the political equation, as Germany has exported carbon footprint into the world and has lived a life where the carbon footprint of our society was quite high and actually grew on it. That's often an issue brought up in the international negotiations. The other point was, well, that doesn't help us so much thinking about the future. We can discuss the past responsibility forever, but that will not help us creating the future we want to see. That was the other kind of point of view. So it's kind of a question, what role does the past play with the view to the future? And as you're part of Fridays for Future, I would be interested in your views on that one, because it's a challenging issue and it is brought up by the Global South in the negotiations, sometimes as a stumbling block and sometimes as a real cause. And I would be interested in your views on that one.
Well, of course, it's a really important question. And I mean, it has been also implemented in the Paris Agreement where, we speak of burden sharing, for instance, and there are mechanisms that I really set up to make sure that we kind of share this whole project that is before us in an equal way. And by equal, I'm talking especially of equity here. And I think obviously, if we have we have an interest in other countries skipping certain fossil fuel steps that we have taken, but in order for them to be able to do that, we need to support that. And at the other side, we've exported and imported and produced emissions on such a scale that we can speak of the climate crisis as a climate crisis made in Germany also. We are among the top 5 historic emitters. And it means obviously that we are partly responsible, if we like it or not, for the damage that's happening in other parts of the world. So obviously the question for us is, okay, how can we help with adaptation? How can we help with risks and climate disasters in other places. That is something that is not just a historic aspect to this, but also a question of capacity and resources. We are also among the wealthiest nations worldwide, so we have hugely gained from our fossil fuel exports and from our fossil fuel production. Yet I think on the aspect of our historic responsibility here in Germany, I think it seems to me at least that there's a bit of a misunderstanding what is meant when we speak about that. When we, as Fridays for Future, for instance, approach our leaders and say, well, please change the ways because we are on a really problematic pathway, the first thing that would say is they would list what they've done in the past. Well, we've been doing here, and then often they start with explaining that they've once been part of the peace movement too, in order to kind of emphasize, well, we've been doing things too. And I understand the tendency to do that, to make sure that, you can tell yourself a proper story of your achievements. Yeah, this is really not what we are about. And we are okay with the past if we were to agree that we can make a stop now and change the ways from now on. This is also what we are also discussing a lot with the coalition in Hessen, for instance, in Germany, where we are in a conflict about a road. We really don't care what has been, who has been responsible for what in the past. It's about the here and now and who is stepping up now, taking responsibility and showing solutions to those urgent problems. That is, and I'm completely fine with then, not discussing every single aspect of the part. At the point that we have agreed, there is a historic burden that we are carrying in Germany, in Europe. That is a responsibility, that is somehow also a privilege, and that's something we need to live up to. The burning question is, however, what do we make out of this right now?
Thank you very much. That was very insightful. I will take Professor Messner in a second. Just one question to you. As we will not have the time to make another round, would that be also your inspiring final statement, or do you want to add something for a final statement in a second, or will that be, I just want to give you the chance because we will then have final statements together with the answers.
Okay, lots of pressure on an inspiring, sorry, is it for me or for Mr. Messner? Okay, well, I'm not sure how inspirational that can be now. Yet what I would just really leave here is that any discussion that we are having right now about how to proceed needs to look at the reality that we are facing as it's a 1.2 degree warmer world, and it is a disaster for so many. There is no choice whether we want to reach for 2 degree or 1.5 degree. It's really a matter of livelihoods. It's a matter of existence there for many. And the crucial time frame that we talk about is the next 5 years. The graphs need to bend, the emission curves need to be bent at that very time frame. And that is also what policy needs to look at, what our targets need to look at, what we need to focus really on in this time. Otherwise, any talking about net zero at 2050 is just wishful thinking. And also a world that is not, very much inhabitable for too many people anymore.
Thank you very much. So hopefully the next UNEP GAP report will report very different numbers. But Professor Messner, you wanted to react directly, and I invite you also for your final statement, then Francisca Brantner, and then we come to digitalization and the final statements. Yes.
Yeah, I will combine two thoughts, I think. I wanted to react again on the historical responsibility thing, because for me this is very important. And Hinrich, I see things a bit different in this field. Also, we converge very often in many other fields. I think we cannot shy away from historical responsibilities because, as Luisa said, this is an international justice issue. I mean, have in mind the loss and damage debate which we have in the field of cultural heritage, for example. Who will pay for that? Who is responsible for that? Who has been driving this? And we have data showing who drove this. And since 1990, the IPCC process, we know about it. So we cannot shy away from this kind of international justice debate. We always like to move more rapidly into the innovation field, technologies, etc. This is very important, this is fine. But if we don't consider international justice issues as important, we will not get international cooperation right. And now my second remark, and Camilla, I'm coming then to the end. My second remark is the same is true in the national level also. So the justice issue is also relevant, and fairness issues are also relevant to get climate protection right. I mean, one element is that the top 20% of our population, so probably all of us here around the virtual table, our climate impact obviously is much higher than the impact of the bottom 30, 40, 50% of our population. So there is a justice issue also here. And if we look into climate protection in investments, in any field, this always have distributional impacts. If we don't see these impacts, we might lose people who have problems to then finance their daily living. So we have to take this into consideration. If we don't take this into consideration, we will not get the legitimacy right for climate protection.
Thank you very much. Now that's a wonderful phase over to Francisca Brantner. How do we actually square the circle and thinking of all the aspects, the world, the national, the global, the people who lose, the people who want to change things. How do we bring that all together? And you can react and bring in what your thoughts were and make a final statement on that one.
Yes, thank you. I very much agree with what Dirk Messner just said. We have a huge responsibility towards the South. And it comes to financing. It also comes to livelihoods. We have many responsibilities there. And I think that we have to fight much more for them in the German context, because it's sometimes fading away. And we cannot swipe the past away. We can't do it in the international context, and we cannot do it in the national context. And yes, Luisa, I know that it's frustrating with this auto car, highway in Hessen. It goes much further. And I have, my colleagues who have fought for this for so long. And at one point, when you go through all the courts levels and all your opportunities, and then you're sort of stuck. And I still think it's important to respect the rule of law, because it's under threat in Europe and worldwide. And we have talked about, Mr. Thölken said, the EU budget right now being blocked on the question of rule of law by Poland and Hungary. And I think, the rule of law is so fundamental, and it's so much under threat that it's a very precious thing that we have to protect as well as climate activists. And for me, it's really key. I can tell you I'm fighting on the rule of law every day, and I'm fighting hard so that we don't go into authoritarian populist style governments in more countries than we already have it. So, for me, that's still the basis. And sometimes, yes, it's very frustrating. And that's why we have to get majorities. And I think the points that Dirk Messner said on creating majorities, in Hans in the chat, on making sure we have the farmers on board. I think in Baden-Württemberg, we did it very well. We had this joint agreement between farmers and the biodiversity activists, and it came out better than what we had hoped for. And then we do it, that we have alternatives on how people can get to work, etc. I think it will be key if we want to get majorities for it. And that's what we need to achieve. And we may not be divided on this. Let's not be divided. I think that is the biggest risk we all take in the next coming of months on being divided on this. And one last point on the digital, which I would like to get the opinion on from the colleague, is what if we set a standard on all servers that are used inside the EU or in the US but have traffic into the EU, that they must be using green energy?
A very concrete, specific suggestion to our digital experts and international experts. Mr. Thölken, your famous last words. We have actually 2 minutes left. I will go into overdrive, overtime. I will just add a few minutes at the end. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm very short. I'm happy with what Luisa just said, but also Dirk and Franziska pointed out about the justice issue and the responsibility. But I also share Luisa's, let's say, pragmatic approach. Let's go and see what we can do to the future. But it might be a discussion for a different time. About digital, I think we are on an extremely steep learning curve to really understand what it all means for us. 2015, when we put together the Agenda 2030, digital hardly played any role at all. It's just 5 years ago. And now today, it's a centerpiece, and we know that all SDGs can be implemented and reached much better by using smart technologies. We talked about clean tech. It was mentioned, green energy for servers. Excellent idea. I love it. Let me just give you one comparison. I often see the figure that digital infrastructure consumes as much energy or produces as much greenhouse gas as global aviation. I just saw an article in The Guardian that 1% of the global population produces 50% of the aviation greenhouse gas emissions. If you compare this to the digital sector, I think digital is much more, let's say, democratic, that many millions of people use digital infrastructure on the planet. So we could not possibly say that only 1% of the population creates so much energy consumption and greenhouse gas emission. So there's a difference between, let's say, what digital does in terms of greenhouse gas emissions as being part of the problem, and also digital can also be a big part of the solution. And this is what we have to learn we have to find out how to do it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How to do it right. That exactly we have to learn. Christian Kroll, how do we do it right? What are your famous last words?
Yeah, so just I want to touch on responsibility as well, not so much the question who is responsible or who not, but also just as a German citizen, I would be really proud to see Germany lead on the topic of solving climate change and potentially even being the most altruistic country in the world when it comes to that, like a country that doesn't look for its own benefits, but really looks how we can help solve this issue globally. So that would make me really proud as a citizen. Maybe it's difficult to implement that on a policy level, but at least this is my perspective on this. I totally agree with the 100% of all servers should be using green energy. We've done it. We are 200% green energy. That can also be done. So it's easy. Everybody should do that. All companies should do that. And when it comes to digitalization, I think, yeah, the sense of urgency is really important here. I think if COVID would not have come along, then we would still be doing all conferences just in-person meetings, which would of course be nice, but something like this wouldn't have been possible if this artificial sense of urgency wouldn't have come up. And I think we need to keep that momentum and really also transition much more quicker to digital solutions. And very pragmatically, I could ask who is already using Ecosia on their servers, or in their company. That's one of the easiest things you can do. Potentially absorbs a few tons of CO2 per person every year. So I think that's one easy takeaway that I could recommend to everyone, of course.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to this wonderful panel. We took so many issues on, it was almost breathtakingly full, and we can dive much deeper on many of those. So I know we will stay in contact to continue working on these issues, and we have to, and not only the next 5 years, but also beyond, but particularly in the next 5 years. So I wish you and all of us a great success in actually making this a successful moment in time. I say at this moment goodbye to my wonderful panel. Thank you each and every one of you for being with us and presenting a progressive German view on the situation. And I just want to say we were progressive, but there were agencies and ministries on board. So that makes me and the German Bundestag. So there was a great mix to show that there is a wind of change blowing. We already had a view on what is coming in the future by Céline when she started this panel debate with her wrap up. So you know what's coming next. And at this moment, I want to say thank you. I would like to say thank you to my entire team, to the entire team of Think2030 for being wonderful. I want to say thank you to all the people who made this conference possible in times of Corona. Hello, it was so many changes along the way, you cannot even imagine. So I want to say thank you to the funders, to the partners, to the authors, to the organizers, too many names to even mention. I also want to say thank you to speakers and moderators for their enlightening contributions, and to all of you making this event successful despite the challenges. But I want to name some names. I want to say thank you to Erin, Eloise, Elena, Bartosz, Clara, Sarah, Johannes, Philip, and Maya, and just want to say, you rock! You really rocked. That was amazing, because we were talking about learning. We had to learn a lot doing, you know, digital events, doing big digital events, doing big international digital events. You rock, you made it happen. And all the contingency plans, you don't even want to know what kind of contingency plans we had in mind. And one we even used. I want to say thank you to all the participants, and of course to my wonderful partner in crime, Céline. And I just have to say it's a beautiful way to celebrate Ecologic's 25th anniversary. We look forward to continuing the discussion. If you want to do that informally already today, there will be an informal meeting room again open on the Wova platform today. And overall, I just have to say, stay healthy, stay happy, and let's make the EGD the best it can be. Best wishes to all of you all around the EU, every single member state and the world. Goodbye for now from me and Céline. You want to come in with some last words?
Well, thanks a lot, Camilla. This has been a great adventure when we decided, you know, almost probably 2 years ago to co-organize this session of Think2030. So thanks a lot. I still am gutted that we couldn't be in Berlin. Okay, I guess I need to get used to virtual Berlin visits. And that means that maybe in 22 we will be in Paris with IDRI, or maybe this will be virtual Paris. But in any case, it's great to have had all this Green Deal community come together. Let's continue to dream, but let's also make our common dream reality. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, and goodbye.